The email arrived at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. I was drinking coffee at the kitchen counter when my phone lit up with a notification from the patent office. Quarterly royalty distribution, automated and clinical, listing a deposit amount that ended in 4 zeros before the decimal point. I set the mug down slowly and read the number again. Then, I opened the document attachment and saw the licensee names. 3 Fortune 500 companies, 2 university research labs, 1 defense contractor whose name I recognized from congressional hearings, all of them paying to use an algorithm I had written alone in this house, at this counter, over 18 months of methodical problem solving. The same algorithm my older brother had presented at a conference in Austin 6 weeks earlier, standing under stage lights while 200 engineers applauded. I forwarded the email to a folder I had labeled Documentation and poured another cup. My hand was steady. That steadiness surprised me less than it might have 2 months ago, before I understood how deeply the pattern ran. Michael had always been the one who spoke first, smiled wider, claimed more space in a room. I had let him. For 41 years I had let him because he was my brother and because our mother had asked me, the week before she died, to look after him. She had not meant it the way it sounded. She had meant it the way mothers mean everything, with hope that blood would soften the edges of ego and ambition. But I was learning that some edges only grow sharper with time. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tick of the baseboard heat cycling on. I lived alone now, had for 3 years since the divorce was finalized, and Claire took our daughter north to live near her parents. The house felt larger without them, but not empty. I had filled it with work, with routines that required precision and a kind of meditative focus that kept other thoughts at a distance. Mornings were for coffee and code review, afternoons for testing and iteration, evenings for documentation and planning. It was a life that suited me, quiet and structured, built around problems that had solutions if you were patient enough to find them. Michael had always operated differently. He was the older one by 4 years, and he had learned early that confidence could substitute for preparation if you delivered it with enough polish. He had worked in sales, then product management, then business development at a series of startups that either folded or got acquired for their talent rather than their technology. He was good at pitching, at reading a room, at making people believe a product was further along than it actually was. I had watched him do it dozens of times at family gatherings, at barbecues, at our father's funeral 2 years back when he had somehow turned the reception into a networking event. He never seemed embarrassed by it. He called it maximizing opportunities. We had started collaborating 8 months before the conference. I say collaborating, but the work had not been evenly distributed. Michael had approached me with an idea he described as revolutionary, a way to optimize resource allocation in distributed computing networks. He had sketched it on a napkin at a diner near my house, talking fast, hands moving in broad gestures that knocked over the salt shaker twice. I had listened and nodded, and later that night, alone, I had opened my laptop and started translating his rough concept into something that might actually function. The mathematics were complex. The implementation required 3 distinct algorithmic approaches, each nested inside the others like Russian dolls, each dependent on timing and load balancing in ways that were not intuitive. I spent weeks on the core logic alone, testing it against synthetic datasets I built from scratch, refining the recursion until the performance curve flattened into something predictable. Michael checked in weekly, sometimes twice a week. He would stop by with takeout or send long text messages asking how things were progressing. I sent him updates, careful summaries of what I had solved and what remained uncertain. He responded with enthusiasm, with suggestions that were occasionally useful, but more often reflective of a fundamental misunderstanding of the technical constraints. I did not correct him harshly. He was trying to help, and he had been the one to see the commercial potential when I might have let the idea gather dust in a GitHub repository no one would ever clone. By month 5, I had a working prototype. It reduced processing overhead by 38% in controlled tests and scaled linearly up to 1,000 nodes without degradation. I documented everything, wrote technical specifications that could guide an implementation team, recorded benchmarks that proved the efficiency gains were real and reproducible. Michael asked if he could present it at a regional tech meetup. I hesitated, then agreed. He was better at public speaking, and I told myself that exposure might lead to partnerships or funding if we decided to commercialize it. He delivered the talk to 40 people in a co-working space downtown. Afterward, 3 attendees approached him with business cards. One of them mentioned a conference in Austin that drew national attention, an annual event where companies scouted for emerging technologies. Michael said he would submit a proposal. I did not think much about it until 6 weeks later when he texted me a screenshot of an acceptance email. The conference had approved his talk. He would present our algorithm to an audience of industry leaders, investors, and researchers. I congratulated him and asked to see the abstract he had submitted. He sent it the next morning. I read it twice, standing in my driveway with my phone in one hand and my car keys in the other. The language was mine, lifted almost verbatim from the technical documentation I had written, but the authorship line listed only his name. I called him. He answered on the third ring, voice bright, background noise suggesting he was in a coffee shop or a busy office. I asked him about the authorship. He paused, then laughed in a way that sounded careful. He said it was a formatting issue, that the conference submission portal had a weird interface, that he would correct it before the actual presentation. I asked if he was certain. He said, of course, told me not to worry, told me he had to run because a meeting was starting. The call ended before I could press further. Something settled in my chest after that conversation, something cold and clarifying. I opened my laptop and searched for the conference guidelines. The submission portal was clear and simple. There was a mandatory field for co-authors. You had to actively choose to leave it blank. I saved a screenshot of the guidelines and filed it in a folder I had not yet named. That afternoon, I called a patent attorney whose name I had found through a professional network. Her office was in a glass tower downtown, 20 minutes from my house if traffic cooperated. I scheduled a consultation for the following week and spent the evening preparing materials. I gathered every email Michael and I had exchanged, every commit in the shared code repository, every design document and test log. I exported the timestamps and organized them chronologically. The story they told was unambiguous. I had built the algorithm. Michael had contributed ideas and enthusiasm, but he had not written a single line of the final implementation. He had not derived the equations. He had not debugged the recursion or optimized the memory footprint or validated the benchmarks. He had talked, and I had worked, and somewhere in that division of labor, he had begun to believe that talking was the same as doing. The attorney's name was Ms. Reyes. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with a precise manner and an office that smelled faintly of lemon furniture polish. I explained the situation without embellishment. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, asking clarifying questions about dates and deliverables and whether Michael and I had signed any agreements about intellectual property. We had not. Everything had been informal, operating on the assumption that brothers did not need contracts. She looked up from her notes and asked if I had filed anything with the patent office. I said no. She asked if Michael had. I said I did not know, but I doubted it. She suggested I check immediately. I drove home and logged into the USPTO database. I searched for Michael's name and found nothing. I searched for keywords related to the algorithm and found nothing filed in the past year. Relief and something darker moved through me at the same time. Relief because the intellectual property was still unclaimed. Something darker because I realized I could claim it first, and that doing so would define everything that came after. I called Ms. Reyes the next morning and told her I wanted to file a patent application under my name alone. She asked if I was certain, if I understood that this might fracture my relationship with my brother. I said I understood. She said she would draft the application and that I should gather every piece of evidence proving my sole authorship. I told her I already had. The application took 3 weeks to prepare. Ms. Reyes was meticulous. She required detailed descriptions of every algorithmic component, diagrams that illustrated the system architecture, claims that were broad enough to cover variations, but specific enough to be defensible. I worked with her in the evenings, answering technical questions, revising language, ensuring that the documentation reflected not just what the algorithm did, but why it mattered. The claims we filed were comprehensive. They covered the core recursive logic, the load-balancing heuristics, the fault tolerance mechanisms, and the optimization techniques that made the whole system viable at scale. If someone wanted to use this approach, they would need to license it from the patent holder. From me. We filed on a Thursday afternoon in late February. The confirmation email arrived within an hour. I printed it and placed it in a binder that I kept on the shelf above my desk, next to my college diplomas and a photo of my daughter on her 8th birthday. Then I waited. Michael did not mention the patent. I did not bring it up. He texted me updates about the upcoming conference, logistical details about his flight and hotel, questions about whether I wanted him to send me the slides in advance for review. I told him I trusted his judgment. That phrase hung in the air between us, unspoken, but heavy with irony he did not yet recognize. The conference took place on a Saturday in mid-March. Michael posted updates on social media throughout the day, photos of the convention center, the crowded exhibition hall, the stage where he would present. I watched from my kitchen, scrolling through the images with a kind of detached curiosity. He looked confident, at ease, the kind of person who belonged under those lights. At 2 p.m. Central Time, he went live on the conference app, streaming his presentation to anyone who had registered online. I opened the stream on my laptop and watched. He was good. I had to admit that. He spoke clearly, moved through the slides with practiced timing, fielded questions with a smoothness that suggested he had anticipated them. He explained the algorithm in terms that made sense to a business audience, emphasizing the cost savings and the competitive advantages without drowning them in technical detail. He did not mention my name, not once. Not in the opening acknowledgments, not in the closing thank yous, not when an audience member asked about the development timeline. He said he had spent the past year refining the approach, testing it, preparing it for commercial deployment. The lie was so casual it almost sounded true. I closed the laptop and walked outside. The air was cool, the sky overcast in a way that suggested rain by evening. I stood on the front steps and breathed slowly, letting the anger move through me and then recede. Anger was useless. Anger made people reckless, and I needed to be deliberate. I went back inside and opened the documentation folder. I added a link to the recorded conference stream and noted the timestamp where Michael had claimed sole authorship. Then I emailed Ms. Reyes and asked her to watch it. She called me the next morning. Her voice was calm but edged with something sharper. She said the presentation constituted public disclosure of the invention, which was fine because we had already filed the patent application. But she also said it was evidence of fraudulent representation if Michael attempted to file his own competing patent or if he tried to claim co-inventorship later. She asked if I wanted to send him a cease and desist letter. I said not yet. She asked what I was waiting for. I told her I wanted to see how far he would go. The answer came 2 weeks later. Michael called me on a Tuesday night, his voice higher than usual, excited in a way that made me grip the phone tighter. He said a venture capital firm had reached out after seeing his presentation. They wanted to discuss a potential partnership, maybe even funding to build a startup around the algorithm. He said this could be huge, that we could quit our jobs and do this full-time, that we might be looking at a Series A round within 6 months. He used the word we, but the way he said it felt conditional, like a courtesy he might revoke once the paperwork was signed. I asked him what he had told the VC firm about ownership and authorship. He hesitated, then said he had explained that he had developed the technology and was looking for a technical co-founder to help with implementation. I asked if he had mentioned me at all. He said, not specifically, not yet, but that he planned to once things got more concrete. I asked if he planned to correct the record about who had actually built the algorithm. His silence lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then he said we could talk about equity splits later, that the important thing was securing the funding first, that I was overthinking the details. I thanked him for calling and hung up. Then I opened my laptop and drafted an email to the VC firm. I introduced myself, explained that I was the sole inventor of the technology Michael had presented, and attached a copy of the patent application confirmation along with time-stamped documentation of the development process. I included links to the code repository showing my commits, design documents with my annotations, and email threads where I had explained technical concepts to Michael in language that made clear he had not understood them initially. I kept the tone professional, factual, free of emotion. Then I copied Ms. Reyes on the email and hit send. The response came within 24 hours. The VC firm thanked me for the clarification and said they would need to reassess the opportunity in light of the intellectual property situation. They did not contact Michael again. I know because he called me 4 days later, his voice tight and accusatory, asking what I had done. I told him the truth. I had corrected a misunderstanding. He said I had sabotaged him, that I had destroyed a chance we might never get again. I asked him why he had lied about authorship. He said he had not lied. He had just positioned things strategically, that I did not understand how business worked. I asked him if he thought I was stupid. He did not answer. I said I would not let him steal my work, and that if he tried again, I would pursue legal action. He hung up without saying goodbye. We did not speak for 6 weeks after that. I continued working on refinements to the algorithm, preparing a second version that incorporated lessons from the initial testing. I also began researching commercialization pathways that did not involve Michael. Ms. Reyes introduced me to a licensing consultant who specialized in technology transfer for independent inventors. His name was Mr. Grayson, and he had a blunt, pragmatic manner that I appreciated. He reviewed the patent application and the technical documentation and said the algorithm had genuine value, particularly for industries dealing with large-scale distributed systems. He suggested I approach companies directly with licensing proposals rather than waiting for them to discover it. I made a list: cloud computing providers, financial services firms running high-frequency trading platforms, logistics companies managing global supply chains, research institutions with supercomputing clusters. I drafted a licensing summary that explained the efficiency gains in clear, quantifiable terms and included benchmark data that demonstrated the performance improvements. Then I started sending emails. The first responses were polite but non-committal. Companies received unsolicited pitches constantly, and most got filtered out by junior staff who did not have the technical background to evaluate them. But a few emails made it through to engineering directors or CTOs who understood what they were looking at. One of them, a VP at a logistics company, called me directly. He said his team had been wrestling with the exact problem my algorithm solved. He asked if I had a working implementation they could test. I said I did. We scheduled a call with his engineering lead for the following week. The technical demo went smoothly. I walked them through the system architecture, explained the recursion and load balancing logic, showed them the benchmarks comparing my approach to their current solution. Their lead engineer asked sharp questions, the kind that revealed she understood the nuances of distributed computing and the trade-offs involved in different optimization strategies. I answered each one without hedging, acknowledging limitations where they existed and explaining why the gains outweighed the costs. By the end of the call, she was nodding, and the VP was asking about licensing terms. Mr. Grayson helped me structure the agreement, a per-node annual fee, modest enough to be attractive but high enough to generate meaningful revenue if adoption scaled. The logistics company signed in April. They deployed the algorithm in a pilot program across 50 distribution centers and saw immediate improvements in routing efficiency and server utilization. Within a month, they expanded it to their full network. Other companies noticed. By June, I had signed licensing deals with 3 more firms. The revenue started arriving in quarterly distributions, automated payments that landed in my business account with the same quiet reliability as the algorithm itself. I did not spend the money frivolously. I paid down the mortgage, set aside funds for my daughter's college, and invested the rest in index funds that compounded slowly and predictably. The numbers grew, but the satisfaction came less from the money than from the vindication. I had built something valuable, and the market had confirmed it. Michael learned about the licensing deals through a mutual acquaintance who worked in the tech industry. He called me on a Friday evening, his voice carefully controlled in a way that suggested he was working to keep it that way. He said he had heard I was commercializing our algorithm. I corrected him. My algorithm. He said we had developed it together, that he had contributed the original vision and strategic direction. I asked him if he had written any code. He said that was not the point, that intellectual contributions went beyond mere implementation. I asked him if he had filed any documentation proving his contributions. He said he should not have to, that I knew what he had done, that I was being vindictive. I told him the Patent Office did not care about what I knew or what he claimed. It cared about documentation, evidence, timestamps, and records. I told him I had all of those things and that they told an unambiguous story. He said I was betraying him, that family was supposed to mean something, that our mother would be ashamed. I felt that last comment in my chest, a sharp pressure that made me pause, but I did not waver. I told him that our mother had asked me to look after him, not to enable him, not to let him steal from me because he smiled nicely and talked smoothly. I told him he had crossed a line when he claimed sole credit for my work, and that consequences had a way of finding people who did that. He hung up without responding. Ms. Reyes advised me to document the call. I wrote a summary while the conversation was still fresh, noting his admission that he had not written code and his implicit acknowledgement that the patent filing was accurate. I saved it in the documentation folder alongside everything else. The folder was thick now, a digital archive of emails and screenshots and legal filings that told the story more clearly than I ever could in person. The patent was granted in September, 18 months after I had filed. The approval letter arrived via email on a Tuesday afternoon. I printed it and placed it in the binder above my desk, a tangible marker of a process that had been abstract and bureaucratic until it suddenly was not. With the patent granted, the licensing agreements became stronger, the revenue more predictable. Companies that had been hesitant about licensing pending intellectual property now moved forward with confidence. 2 more firms signed deals in October. A defense contractor approached me in November about a custom implementation for secure communications infrastructure. The quarterly distributions grew larger. Michael sent an email in December. It was the first direct communication in months. He wrote that he had been thinking about our argument, that he realized he had made mistakes in how he had handled things, that he wanted to make amends. He proposed we meet for coffee, neutral territory, no lawyers. I read the email 3 times, looking for sincerity, finding only strategy. The timing was too convenient. The royalty checks were public record if you knew where to look, and Michael had always been good at following the money. I replied the next day. I said I was open to meeting, but that there was nothing to negotiate about ownership or credit. Those matters were settled. If he wanted to apologize sincerely and rebuild a relationship on honest terms, I would listen, but I would not be manipulated, and I would not revise history to soothe his ego. He did not respond. The licensing revenue continued. By the end of the year, I had 11 active agreements, and 3 more companies had expressed interest in trials. The algorithm had proven itself across industries, scaling reliably and delivering the efficiency gains I had documented in the original benchmarks. The success was quiet and technical, the kind of thing that did not make headlines, but that changed operational margins for companies managing billions of dollars in infrastructure costs. I was proud of it in a way that had nothing to do with recognition or acclaim. It worked. It solved a problem. It mattered. I saw Michael once more, unexpectedly, at a family gathering my aunt organized for Thanksgiving. He arrived late, stayed for an hour, spoke politely but without warmth. He did not approach me directly. We made eye contact across the living room once, a brief intersection of attention that communicated more than words could have. He looked older, tired in a way that was not entirely physical. I wondered if he had learned anything, if the consequences had reshaped his understanding of boundaries and honesty. I could not tell. Some people change when the world stops rewarding their behavior. Others just find new rooms to work. I left the gathering early, drove home through streets lit by early winter darkness, and sat at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee. The house was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The baseboard heat ticked on. I thought about my mother, about her request that I look after my brother, and about how I had honored that in the only way that seemed sustainable. Looking after someone did not mean protecting them from consequences. It meant holding a line, maintaining standards, and refusing to let love become an excuse for enabling harm. The royalty check that arrived in January was the largest yet. I deposited it, paid my quarterly estimated taxes, and transferred the rest into accounts that would grow slowly over decades. My daughter called that evening, excited about a science project she was working on for school. She talked about hypothesis testing and control variables and the importance of documenting your process so others could verify your results. I listened and smiled, hearing echoes of lessons I had learned the hard way. When she asked if I was proud of her, I said I was, and I meant it in a way that encompassed more than grades or accomplishments. I was proud that she understood the value of precision, of honesty, of doing the work yourself. Michael and I have not spoken in months. I do not expect we will, at least not in any meaningful way. The relationship we had is gone, replaced by something cooler and more distant. I regret that loss, but I do not regret the choices that led to it. Protecting what I had built was not optional. The algorithm was mine. The work was mine. The consequences were his. I still sit at this counter in the early mornings, drinking coffee, reviewing code, planning the next iteration. The routines have not changed much. The house is still quiet. The work is still demanding and precise. But there is a clarity now that was absent before, a sense of alignment between what I do and what I can claim as my own. That clarity is worth more than the royalty checks, though the checks are a welcome validation. I learned that betrayal does not require grand gestures or villainous intent. It can arrive softly, dressed in convenience and entitlement, justified by 100 small rationalizations. And I learned that justice, when it comes, does not need to announce itself loudly. It can arrive as quietly as an automated deposit notification at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, turning a lie into a matter of public record, one payment at a time.